Black billionaire girl seat stolen by white passenger, seconds later, flight gets grounded. Excuse me, sir. I believe you're in my seat, Aaliyah Thompson said calmly, extending her first-class boarding pass toward the man sprawled across seat 2A. The middle-aged businessman barely lifted his eyes from his phone. No, little girl, he replied with a dismissive wave. You're in the wrong place. Economy is back there. Gasps rippled through the cabin. Phones began to rise. And Aaliyah's expression didn't change, but her hand reached slowly into her bag. What happened next would halt a transatlantic flight before takeoff, expose the kind of prejudice that hides behind expensive suits, and prove that the child you dismiss today might be the person who owns the very ground you stand on tomorrow. This wasn't just about a seat. This was about a lesson the entire world was about to learn, one that would trend globally within hours and change airline policy forever. Welcome to NUV Stories. Every narrative we share goes beyond entertainment, it's about justice, dignity, and the power of standing firm when the world tries to move you. If you believe in stories that inspire change and celebrate those who refuse to be diminished, hit that like and subscribe button right now. Drop a comment telling us where you're watching from and what time it is there. We love connecting with our global community. 11-year-old Aaliyah Thompson moved through Heathrow's first-class boarding gate with the poised elegance of someone who had done this hundreds of times before. At barely over 4 feet tall, dressed in a cream silk blouse and mahogany-tailored coat, she carried herself with a quiet dignity that came from years of navigating boardrooms, charity galas, and international youth summits. Her modest Italian handbag, the kind celebrities waited months to acquire, hung from her shoulder. Her leather travel folder contained her boarding pass, passport, and a handwritten note from her father. Most travelers didn't notice these details. They noticed something else first: she was young. And she was black. The boarding lounge receptionist had looked confused when Aaliyah approached alone. A businessman near the gate had glanced at her, then away, clearly assuming she was some employee's kid. 2 men in expensive watches had whispered something about Instagram children. She heard it all. She always did. But Aaliyah had learned long ago which battles to fight and which assumptions to let dissolve on their own. This was her 15th international flight this year alone, splitting time between her London boarding school, her father's Chicago headquarters, and their homes in Miami and Johannesburg. First class wasn't a luxury for Aaliyah Thompson. It was simply routine. Her father, Marcus Thompson, had built Thompson Global Enterprises from nothing, a $12 billion empire spanning technology, aviation, finance, and sustainable energy. Forbes called him the Black Tech Titan. Presidents sought his counsel. But to Aaliyah, he was simply the man who taught her that dignity was non-negotiable. But to look at Aaliyah as she walked down that jet bridge, most people saw only a little black girl. And unfortunately, that was exactly what the man in seat 2A saw. She reached row 2 and stopped. Her seat, the window seat she'd specifically selected, was occupied. A middle-aged white businessman had made himself entirely too comfortable in seat 2A, legs stretched, navy suit jacket draped over the armrest, phone in hand. His graying hair was slightly disheveled, his posture screamed entitlement, and his expression suggested a man who had never been told no by anyone he didn't consider his equal. He didn't look up when she approached. "Excuse me," Aaliyah said, her voice clear and polite, carrying the refined accent of someone educated across 3 continents. "I believe you're in my seat." She extended her boarding pass, crisp, legitimate, clearly marked, seat 2A. First class. Miss A. Thompson. Any reasonable person would have glanced at it, realized the mistake, and moved immediately. But this man wasn't reasonable. He lifted his eyes slowly, barely interrupting his scrolling. His gaze swept over Aaliyah, young, black, alone, and his brain apparently filed her under, not important. He didn't even look at the boarding pass. "No, little girl," he said, his tone dripping with condescension as he waved his hand like dismissing a servant. "You're confused. This is first class. Economy is back there. He gestured vaguely toward the rear of the aircraft. The words landed like stones. Around them, passengers' heads turned. Someone's magazine lowered. A woman in seat 3C frowned. A teenager across the aisle quietly opened his phone camera. Aaliyah didn't flinch. She didn't raise her voice. She simply held the boarding pass steady and repeated herself. "Sir, this is my seat. My ticket clearly shows seat 2A. The man's smirk widened. He leaned back, making himself even more comfortable, as if her persistence was amusing. "Sweetheart," he drawled, "I don't know who gave you that ticket, but you need to run along before boarding closes. Go find whoever's supposed to be watching you." That's when the flight attendant arrived, perfectly timed, perfectly poised, and made a decision that would change everything. She looked at Aaliyah. Then at the businessman. Then back at Aaliyah. And without asking to see the boarding pass, she smiled apologetically at the man and said to Aaliyah, "Sweetie, let's go check your ticket at the gate, okay? I'm sure we can sort this out." The message was clear, she believed him, not her. Aaliyah's jaw tightened, just barely. Around her, more phones rose. Someone whispered, "Are you recording this?" But Aaliyah Thompson had been raised by a man who taught her that power didn't need to shout. She reached into her bag with calm precision, pulled out her phone, and spoke in a voice that was quiet, controlled, and absolutely final. "That won't be necessary." She tapped a single contact. The phone rang once. Twice. Then a deep, familiar voice answered on speaker. "Hello, sweetheart. Everything all right?" Aaliyah's expression didn't change. But the cabin suddenly felt smaller. "Hi, Daddy," she said evenly. "I'm on flight 457 to Miami. There's a man in my first-class seat who refuses to move. And the flight attendant doesn't believe the seat is mine." There was a pause. The kind of pause that precedes earthquakes. Then Marcus Thompson's voice, calm, measured, and laced with something that made every passenger within earshot sit up a little straighter, responded. "Put me on speaker. And tell me who I'm speaking to." That was the moment everything changed. Because this wasn't just any little girl. This was the daughter of the man whose company had a controlling stake in the very airline they were flying. And in the next 60 seconds, every single person on Flight 457 was about to learn a lesson about assumptions, prejudice, and the dangerous mistake of underestimating someone based on how they look. But to understand why this moment mattered, why Aaliyah responded the way she did, you need to know who she was long before she ever stepped onto Flight 457. Because Aaliyah Thompson wasn't just another passenger. She was the daughter of a legend. Before Aaliyah Thompson ever stepped onto Flight 457, the world already whispered her name, not with the fleeting curiosity reserved for child prodigies or celebrity offspring, but with the kind of reverence usually reserved for those destined to change things. Thompson wasn't just a name. It was a declaration. A promise. A symbol of what happened when brilliance met perseverance, when ambition refused to bow to circumstance. That name belonged to her father, Marcus Thompson. The man who had clawed his way out of Detroit's most forgotten neighborhood, raised by a single mother who worked 3 jobs to keep the lights on. The man who'd been told he'd never make it past high school, let alone college. The man who'd been denied bank loans 17 times before someone finally believed in his vision. And the man who, despite every closed door, every boardroom that tried to silence him, every investor who underestimated him because of the color of his skin, became one of the most powerful black entrepreneurs on the planet. Marcus Thompson didn't just build a company. He built an empire. Thompson Global Enterprises was a name that commanded respect in technology, aviation, finance, media, sustainable energy, and luxury hospitality. With a net worth surpassing $12 billion, Marcus had redefined what was possible for black excellence in spaces that had historically locked people like him out. They called him the Black Tech Titan. The press wrote features about his rise. Business schools taught case studies on his strategies. World leaders sought his counsel. But to his daughter, he was simply Dad. And he had raised Aaliyah with one unshakable truth: the world will test you not because you lack worth, but because they fear what you represent. Stay kind. Stay firm. And never, ever let them make you small. Aaliyah had absorbed those lessons from the moment she could understand language. At 6 years old, she stood on a stage at a United Nations Youth Summit and delivered a speech on access to education that left diplomats wiping their eyes. Her words were simple, clear, and devastatingly effective: if you believe children are the future, then stop treating our voices like they don't matter today. By age 8, she'd launched her own STEM initiative, Girls Who Code the Future, focused on bringing technology education to underserved communities across 3 continents. She didn't just cut ribbons at events. She sat with the girls, coding alongside them, learning their stories, understanding their barriers. At 9, Forbes featured her as the youngest honorary ambassador for tech-driven education. The headline read, "The next generation of leadership doesn't wait for permission." She had shaken hands with presidents, sat in on high-level corporate negotiations, absorbing strategy while others assumed she was just a quiet child in the corner. She had been photographed with monarchs, praised by tech moguls, and interviewed by journalists who couldn't quite reconcile her age with the depth of her insight. But here's what the world didn't see in those polished photos and viral videos. Aaliyah Thompson was still just a child. A child who missed her father when he traveled for weeks at a time. A child who sometimes felt lonely in boarding schools where her classmates didn't quite understand the weight she carried. A child who had learned far too young that money and influence couldn't always shield you from prejudice. She had watched her father, a man worth billions, be stopped by security at his own investor dinner because someone assumed a man like him couldn't possibly be the host. She had seen executives underestimate him in meetings, only to watch him buy their companies 6 months later. She had heard the whispers, the microaggressions, the subtle ways people tried to diminish him even after he'd proven himself 100 times over. And Marcus made sure she understood why. Some people will respect you for your character, Aaliyah. Some will respect your accomplishments. But some will never respect you, until they face consequences. And that's not your failure. That's theirs. So Aaliyah learned to move through the world with grace. Poised. Elegant. Unshakable. But she also learned when grace needed to be accompanied by power. That Friday morning at Heathrow, Aaliyah moved through the terminal like she'd done it 1,000 times, because she had. Her cream silk blouse was perfectly pressed. Her mahogany coat tailored to perfection. Her natural curls styled in an elegant bun that took her boarding school roommate 20 minutes to perfect. She carried her Italian leather handbag, a gift from a fashion icon who'd met her at a charity gala, with the ease of someone who understood that wealth wasn't about flaunting, it was about knowing your worth. But as she walked, she noticed the familiar pattern. A security guard's eyes lingering a moment too long, as if trying to decide if she belonged in the first-class lounge. A woman in designer heels glancing at her, then at her own daughter, then back at Aaliyah with visible confusion. 2 businessmen near the gate whispering, one gesturing subtly in her direction. She heard fragments, probably some influencer's kid, traveling alone, must be meeting someone. No one assumed she was traveling first class on her own merit. No one considered that the poised young girl with the boarding folder might actually belong exactly where she was headed. They saw her age. They saw her race. And their assumptions filled in the rest. Aaliyah had learned not to let it sting anymore. Or at least, not to show when it did. She approached the gate agent with her boarding pass ready, her passport in hand. The agent smiled, polite but puzzled. "Are you traveling with family today, sweetheart?" "No, ma'am. Just myself." The agent's smile faltered. She glanced at the ticket, then at Aaliyah, then at the ticket again. "First class." "Yes, ma'am." A pause. Then, with visible effort to remain professional, "All right then. Enjoy your flight." Aaliyah nodded graciously and moved toward the jet bridge, her father's words echoing in her mind, you don't owe anyone an explanation for taking up space you've earned. The announcement crackled overhead, Flight 457 to Miami is now boarding first-class passengers. Aaliyah adjusted her bag on her shoulder, took a steadying breath, and stepped onto the jet bridge. She had no idea that in the next 10 minutes, everything she'd learned about dignity, power, and standing firm would be put to the ultimate test. She had no idea that the man in seat 2A was about to make the worst mistake of his life. And she had no idea that by the time this flight was over, her name would be trending worldwide, not because of her father's empire, but because of the lesson she was about to teach an entire airplane about respect. Flight 457 was boarding. And Aaliyah Thompson was about to show the world exactly who she was. The jet bridge was cold and sterile, the kind of utilitarian gray that made every airport feel identical. Aaliyah's footsteps echoed softly as she approached the aircraft entrance, her leather travel folder tucked neatly under one arm. A flight attendant stood at the door, blonde, impeccably dressed in the airline's signature navy uniform, smile professionally bright. But as Aaliyah stepped through the threshold, that smile flickered with confusion. "Hello, sweetheart," the attendant said, her tone automatically shifting to the sing-song register adults used with children. "Are you traveling with someone today? Where are your parents?" Aaliyah had expected this. She always did. "Good morning," she replied with practiced politeness, extending her boarding pass. "I'm traveling alone. Seat 2A. The flight attendant's eyes widened almost imperceptibly. She glanced at the ticket, then at Aaliyah, then back at the ticket as if the ink might rearrange itself into something that made more sense to her. "First class," she repeated slowly, as if testing the words. "Yes, ma'am." A beat of silence. Then the attendant's professional mask clicked back into place. "Of course. Right this way." But Aaliyah didn't miss the quick glance the woman exchanged with her colleague at the galley, a look that said, "Did you see that?" She'd seen it before. She'd see it again. The first-class cabin was a world unto itself. Rich cream leather seats, each one a private throne that reclined into a fully flat bed. Ambient lighting cast a soft golden glow across polished wood accents and brushed metal fixtures. The air smelled faintly of expensive cologne and fresh flowers from the welcome arrangement near the cockpit door. This wasn't transportation. This was an experience designed for people who expected the world to bend around their comfort. And the passengers matched the aesthetic perfectly. A silver-haired man in a charcoal suit sat in 1A, his Rolex catching the light as he typed on a titanium laptop. Across the aisle, a woman in pearls and Chanel sipped champagne that hadn't been requested, it had simply appeared, because people like her never had to ask. Behind them, a younger executive adjusted his noise-canceling headphones, scrolling through stock portfolios on a tablet. Every seat exuded the same energy, entitlement wrapped in expensive fabric. As Aaliyah walked down the narrow aisle, heads turned. Not in welcome. In curiosity. In confusion. The silver-haired man's eyes followed her over the rim of his reading glasses. The woman in pearls paused mid-sip, her gaze sweeping from Aaliyah's small frame to the flight attendant behind her, as if waiting for an explanation. The young executive didn't bother hiding his stare. Whispers started, low, discreet, but unmistakable. "Is she lost? Maybe a flight attendant's daughter? They let unaccompanied minors in first class now." Aaliyah kept her expression neutral, her posture straight. She had learned long ago that confidence wasn't about reacting to every stare. It was about moving through space as if you owned it, because you did. She reached row 2 and stopped. Seat 2A, her window seat, the one she'd specifically selected for the view during descent into Miami, was occupied. The man sprawled across her seat looked like he'd been born into spaces like this. Middle-aged, white, with graying hair styled in that effortlessly expensive way that required a professional barber and premium product. His navy suit was well-tailored but rumpled from travel, his silk tie loosened, his leather dress shoes kicked off beneath the seat in front of him. He'd made himself entirely too comfortable, laptop open on the tray table, phone in one hand, complimentary amenity kit torn open beside him. He hadn't just taken the seat. He'd colonized it. Aaliyah stopped at the row and cleared her throat politely. "Excuse me, sir." He didn't look up, his thumb continued scrolling across his phone screen, his expression one of intense focus on whatever held his attention: email, stock prices, social media, something clearly more important than the child standing beside him. Aaliyah waited 3 seconds. Then tried again, her voice clear and measured. "Excuse me. I believe you're in my seat." This time, he glanced up, barely. His eyes swept over her in less than a second, young, black, alone, small. His brain made a calculation, reached a conclusion, and dismissed her. He didn't even ask to see her ticket. "No," he said flatly, returning his attention to his phone. "You're confused." Aaliyah felt the familiar tightening in her chest, not fear, not even anger yet, just the weary recognition of a script she'd seen performed too many times. She held out her boarding pass, keeping her voice steady and polite. "Sir, my ticket clearly shows seat 2A. This is my assigned seat." The man's jaw tightened with visible irritation. He let out an exaggerated sigh, the kind designed to communicate that she was wasting his valuable time. When he looked at her again, his expression had shifted from dismissive to openly condescending. "Little girl," he said slowly, emphasizing each word as if speaking to someone who couldn't understand basic English, "this is first class. I don't know who gave you that ticket or what game you're playing, but you need to go find your actual seat." He waved his hand vaguely toward the back of the aircraft. "Economy is that way." The words landed like a slap. Around them, the cabin went still. The silver-haired man in 1A had stopped typing, his fingers frozen above his keyboard. The woman in pearls leaned slightly into the aisle, eyes wide. The young executive had removed one side of his headphones. Someone in row 3 whispered, "Oh my God, is he serious?" Someone else, "She's just a kid." But Aaliyah didn't flinch. Her father's voice echoed in her mind, "When they try to make you small, stand taller. When they raise their voice, lower yours. Dignity is a weapon they can't take from you." "Sir," she repeated, her tone calm but firmer now, "I am not confused. This is my seat. I have my boarding pass right here." "I don't care what you have," the man interrupted, his voice rising with impatience. He turned fully toward her now, his body language aggressive. "I'm not moving. Go find a flight attendant if you have a problem. But stop bothering me." That's when Aaliyah noticed it, the phone. In the row across the aisle, a teenager, maybe 16, biracial, wearing a Howard University hoodie, had his camera pointed directly at them. The red recording light blinked steadily. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second. The teenager nodded almost imperceptibly, then mouthed 2 words, "Keep going." Aaliyah's grip tightened on her boarding pass. Behind her, a flight attendant approached, the same blonde woman from the entrance, her expression uncertain as she assessed the situation. And Aaliyah realized with cold clarity that this moment was about to become a choice. She could back down. Walk away. Find another seat. Avoid the confrontation. Or she could stand exactly where she was and make everyone in this cabin confront what they'd rather ignore. The businessman smirked, sensing her hesitation, interpreting it as weakness. "Economy is that way, little girl," he repeated, louder this time, ensuring everyone could hear him. "Run along now." The phone kept recording. And Aaliyah Thompson made her choice. The flight attendant arrived with practiced efficiency, her heels clicking softly against the cabin floor. But as she approached, Aaliyah noticed something that made her stomach tighten. The woman's eyes went first to the businessman, then to Aaliyah, and her expression carried the subtle bias of someone who had already decided who was right. "Is there a problem here?" the attendant asked, her tone carefully neutral but her body language telling a different story. She stood closer to the man's seat, angled slightly away from Aaliyah. The businessman seized the moment like a lawyer presenting evidence to a sympathetic jury. Yes, there is, he said with exaggerated patience, gesturing toward Aaliyah as if she were an interesting problem to be solved. This child is insisting I'm in her seat. I've tried to explain that she's confused, but she won't listen. Could you please help her find where she's actually supposed to be? The flight attendant's lips pressed into a thin, sympathetic smile, aimed at him, not at Aaliyah. Of course, sir. I'm so sorry for the disruption. Then, turning to Aaliyah with that patronizing gentleness reserved for children who'd wandered off, "Sweetie, let's take a look at your ticket together, okay? I'm sure we can get you to your correct seat." Aaliyah extended her boarding pass immediately, her hand steady. "This is my correct seat. Seat 2A, first class. My name is on the ticket." The flight attendant took the pass, but barely glanced at it before handing it back. "Honey, sometimes tickets get printed wrong, or maybe someone made a mistake when—" "There's no mistake," Aaliyah interrupted quietly. "That is my seat. I booked it. I paid for it. And that man is sitting in it." The businessman laughed, an ugly, dismissive sound that carried across the cabin. "Sweetheart," he said, leaning forward with mock concern, "did someone give you that ticket? A stranger, maybe? Because this sounds like one of those scams where people sell fake first-class passes to." "No one gave me anything," Aaliyah cut in, her voice still controlled but gaining an edge. "I purchased this ticket. It's legitimate. And I'm asking you, politely, to move to your assigned seat." "Power doesn't need to shout," her father's voice whispered in her memory. "The quieter you are, the louder the truth becomes." The man's smirk widened. He settled back into the seat, her seat, and crossed his arms like a king refusing to vacate his throne. "Look, little girl, I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but I've been flying first class for 20 years. I know how this works. And I know that children don't just fly alone in premium cabins." His eyes narrowed with theatrical suspicion. "Where are your parents? Who's supposed to be supervising you?" Murmurs rippled through the cabin. The woman in pearls whispered to her seatmate, maybe she did steal someone's ticket. But the teenager with the Howard hoodie kept recording, his jaw tight with barely contained anger. And the silver-haired man in 1A had turned fully around, watching with an expression Aaliyah couldn't quite read, somewhere between fascination and discomfort. The flight attendant placed a hand on Aaliyah's shoulder, gentle, but unmistakably steering. "Why don't we step off the plane for just a moment and sort this out at the gate? I'm sure the agents can." "No," Aaliyah's voice was quiet, but it cut through the suggestion like steel. She didn't move. "I'm not leaving. This is my seat. I have proof. And I'm asking that you check his boarding pass before making assumptions about mine." For the first time, uncertainty flickered across the flight attendant's face. The businessman sensed it too, and didn't like it. "Are you kidding me right now?" he snapped, his voice rising. "You're actually entertaining this?" He jabbed a finger toward Aaliyah. "She's a child. She probably found that ticket on the ground or printed a fake online. I'm a Platinum Elite member. I've flown 500,000 miles with this airline. And you're going to take her side?" "I'm not taking anyone's side, sir," the attendant said quickly, her professional mask slipping. "I'm just trying to." "Then do your job and get her out of first class." The cabin was dead silent now. Even the ambient engine hum seemed to fade beneath the weight of what was unfolding. Aaliyah felt the familiar burn behind her eyes, not tears of sadness, but of frustration at a script she'd seen played out too many times. The script where an adult man's word was gospel and a black child's truth was fiction. But she didn't cry. She didn't break. Instead, she straightened her shoulders and spoke with the measured clarity she'd learned from watching her father dismantle boardrooms full of men who underestimated him. "Sir, I paid for this seat. My name is Aaliyah Thompson. My ticket is legitimate. And I am asking you, one more time, to please check your boarding pass and move to your correct seat." The man's face flushed red. He shot to his feet, towering over her, using his height as intimidation. I don't care what your name is. I don't care who you think you are. This is my seat, and you need to. Show me your boarding pass, Aaliyah said evenly. Excuse me? Your boarding pass. If this is your seat, you should be able to prove it. The businessman's jaw worked silently for a moment, his eyes darting between Aaliyah and the growing number of passengers now openly watching. I don't have to prove anything to you, he finally spat. You're nobody. You're a child playing dress-up in a cabin you don't belong in. And there it was. The truth beneath the condescension. Not just dismissal. Not just annoyance. Pure, unadulterated contempt, for her age, her presence, and yes, the color of her skin. The woman in pearls looked away, suddenly fascinated by her champagne glass. The young executive shifted uncomfortably. But the teenager kept filming, and the silver-haired man in 1A leaned forward, his expression hardening into something like resolve. Aaliyah took a slow breath, her father's final lesson echoing in her mind, when words fail, action speaks. But give them every chance to choose dignity first. She looked directly at the businessman, not up at him, despite his height advantage, but at him, her gaze level and unflinching. Sir, she said, her voice carrying a weight that seemed too heavy for someone her age, this is my last polite request. Please move to your assigned seat, or I will be forced to resolve this situation through other means. The man laughed, harsh, mocking. Other means? What are you going to do, sweetheart? Call your mommy. Around them, someone whispered, oh God, he shouldn't have said that. The flight attendant, sensing something shifting in the air, tried one more time, please, let's all just calm down Anne. But Aaliyah was already reaching into her bag. Her movements were calm. Deliberate. Unbothered. She pulled out her phone, sleek, expensive, completely unlike the device of a child who'd stolen a boarding pass, and her thumb moved with practiced precision. The businessman's smirk faltered. What are you? The phone rang once. Twice. Then a voice answered, deep, measured, and instantly recognizable to anyone who'd ever watched business news or followed tech industry leaders. Hello, sweetheart. Everything all right? Aaliyah's expression didn't change. But something in the cabin did, a shift in atmospheric pressure, like the moment before lightning strikes. Hi, Daddy, she said clearly, her voice steady as stone. I'm on flight 457 to Miami. There's a man sitting in my first-class seat who refuses to move. And the flight attendant doesn't believe I belong here. The businessman's face went from red to pale in less than 3 seconds. And the storm that had been building finally broke. The silence on the phone lasted exactly 2 seconds, but in that cabin, it felt like an eternity. Then Marcus Thompson's voice came through, clear and measured, carrying the kind of authority that didn't need volume to command attention. Take a breath, sweetheart. Tell me exactly what's happening. Aaliyah's voice remained steady, almost eerily calm for a child who'd just been publicly humiliated. I'm standing at row 2. Seat 2A, my assigned seat. A man is sitting in it and refusing to move. When I showed him my boarding pass, he told me I was confused and that economy was that way. She paused, letting the weight of those words settle. The flight attendant arrived and asked me to leave the plane to sort things out at the gate. She didn't ask to see his boarding pass. She didn't verify my ticket. She just assumed. Around them, the atmosphere had shifted entirely. The businessman's smirk had frozen on his face, uncertainty creeping into his eyes. He opened his mouth to speak, then closed it, some survival instinct finally kicking in. The flight attendant's professional smile had vanished completely. Her hand went to her chest, fingers touching the name badge pinned there as if it might suddenly become evidence. And passengers who'd been pretending not to watch were now openly staring, some leaning into the aisle, others pulling out their own phones, but not to record. To search. Marcus Thompson's voice came through again, still calm, but now edged with something that made even the people who couldn't see him straighten in their seats. "Put me on speaker, please." Aaliyah tapped the screen. The cabin filled with her father's presence. "Good morning," Marcus said, his tone conversational but carrying an undercurrent of steel. "My name is Marcus Thompson. To whom am I speaking?" The flight attendant's face had gone from pink to ash gray. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. The businessman found his voice first, but it came out smaller than before, defensive. "Look, I don't know what kind of stunt this is, but I'm a Platinum Elite member, and I don't appreciate being harassed by." "I didn't ask for your frequent flyer status," Marcus interrupted smoothly. "I asked for your name." The man's jaw worked silently. Around him, phones began to glow as passengers typed frantically into search bars. Marcus Thompson. Thompson Global Enterprises. Aaliyah Thompson. The woman in pearls gasped audibly, her hand flying to her mouth as her screen populated with results. The young executive's eyes went wide as his search returned images. Marcus Thompson on the cover of Forbes. Marcus Thompson shaking hands with the president. Marcus Thompson at the World Economic Forum. And there, in a photo from a youth education summit, a younger Aaliyah standing beside her father, both of them smiling as she accepted an award. "Oh no," someone whispered. "Oh no." The teenager with the Howard hoodie had stopped recording and was now grinning openly, his expression pure vindication. The silver-haired man in 1A muttered under his breath, "He's about to ruin this guy's whole life." Marcus Thompson continued, unaware of the digital wildfire spreading through the cabin but clearly sensing the shift through the silence. "Let me be very clear about what's going to happen next," he said, his voice still controlled but now carrying the weight of someone used to reshaping industries with a single phone call. "I'm going to speak with the captain. I'm going to speak with your supervisor. And I'm going to speak with the airline's executive team, several of whom have my personal number, since Thompson Global holds significant investment positions in this carrier." The flight attendant made a small, choked sound. "But first," Marcus continued, "I'd like to understand something. My daughter presented her boarding pass, a legitimate, first-class ticket with her name clearly printed on it. And rather than verify her claim or ask the gentleman in question to present his documentation, you assumed she was wrong. Is that an accurate summary?" "Sir, I was just trying to," the flight attendant stammered. "Yes or no?" "Yes, sir." The businessman finally seemed to grasp the magnitude of his mistake. His face had gone from pale to greenish, sweat beading on his forehead. "Now wait just a minute, I didn't know, nobody told me." "Nobody told you what?" Marcus asked quietly. "That my daughter had the right to her assigned seat. That a child's ticket is as valid as an adult's. That perhaps you should check your own boarding pass before calling an 11-year-old girl a liar." The cabin was so silent you could hear the air circulation system humming. Someone in row 4 whispered, "He owns part of the airline." Someone else, "She tried to remove his daughter from the plane." The woman in pearls had her hand over her face now, visibly mortified on behalf of everyone involved. The businessman tried one more time, his voice cracking, "Sir, I apologize, I didn't mean, this is all just a misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding," Marcus repeated, his tone suggesting he was testing the word, finding it lacking. "Is that what we're calling it when a grown man tells a black child she doesn't belong in first class? When he dismisses her evidence, mocks her age, and suggests she stole her ticket? That's a misunderstanding." The businessman's mouth opened and closed like a fish drowning in air. The flight attendant was crying now, silent tears streaming down her carefully made-up face, her career flashing before her eyes. And Aaliyah stood in the middle of it all, phone in hand, expression neutral, watching the people who dismissed her 30 seconds ago now scrambling to comprehend what they'd done. Marcus Thompson let the silence stretch just long enough to be uncomfortable, then spoke again, this time, his voice carried a finality that made it clear negotiations were over. "Here's what's going to happen. The captain will return this aircraft to the gate. Security will document everything that occurred. And Aaliyah will take her rightful seat, the one she paid for, the one assigned to her, the one she should never have had to fight for in the first place. He paused. And then we're going to have a much longer conversation about unconscious bias, discrimination, and the policies that allow paying passengers to be treated this way. But that conversation won't be with you. The flight attendant let out a sob. The businessman had sunk back into the seat, Aaliyah's seat, his head in his hands. And somewhere in the cockpit, a call was being placed that would ground Flight 457 before it ever left British airspace. Aaliyah finally spoke, her voice soft but clear, "Thank you, Daddy. Always, sweetheart. Always. Now let me talk to the captain." The flight attendant's hand shook as she raised her radio, her voice barely audible, "Captain, we need you in the cabin. Immediately." And in that moment, everyone on Flight 457 learned a lesson that should never have required teaching. The person you underestimate might be the person who changes everything. The girl you dismiss might be the daughter of the man who owns the wings keeping you in the air. And assumptions, especially those built on prejudice, always come with consequences. The captain's voice came through the cabin intercom within 90 seconds, professional but noticeably strained. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing a brief delay. Please remain seated while we address a situation in the cabin. We apologize for the inconvenience." Marcus Thompson's voice cut through the murmurs that followed, still on speaker, still perfectly controlled. "Captain, this is Marcus Thompson. I need you to return this aircraft to the gate immediately. My daughter has been subjected to discrimination by both a passenger and a member of your cabin crew, and I want this documented by airport security before this plane goes anywhere." There was a pause, the captain clearly recognizing the name, understanding the weight it carried. "Mr. Thompson, we'll return to the gate right away. I'm sending my first officer back to assess the situation." "Thank you, Captain. I'll be speaking with your executive team shortly." Marcus's tone shifted slightly, addressing the cabin again. "Now, I'm going to need some information. To the flight attendant currently on scene, what's your name?" The blonde woman's voice came out as barely more than a whisper. "Jennifer. Jennifer Morrison." "Ms. Morrison, what's your employee identification number?" Her hands shook as she fumbled for her badge, reading off the numbers in a trembling voice. "And the gentleman who's been occupying my daughter's seat, I didn't catch your name, sir." The businessman's head snapped up, his face now fully grayish-green. He looked around desperately, as if searching for an exit that didn't exist at 30,000 feet, or rather, still on the tarmac. Edward. Edward Cartwright. "Mr. Cartwright, do you travel frequently with this airline?" "Yes, I'm Platinum Elite, I've been flying with them for..." "That's what I thought." Marcus's voice carried a grim satisfaction. "And Ms. Morrison, in your professional training, were you taught to verify documentation before removing paying passengers from their seats?" "Yes, sir." "And did you, at any point, ask Mr. Cartwright to present his boarding pass?" Silence. "Ms. Morrison?" "No, sir. I didn't." "Why not?" The question hung in the air like an executioner's blade. The flight attendant's face crumpled. I don't know. I just assumed." "You assumed what?" Marcus pressed, his tone sharpening. "That a grown white man in a business suit was more credible than a black child with documentation. Is that the assumption we're discussing?" A passenger in row 3, a black woman in a burgundy blazer, spoke up suddenly, her voice ringing with righteous anger. "That's exactly what she assumed. We all saw it. She didn't even look at the girl's ticket properly. She didn't look at it at all," the teenager with the Howard hoodie added, holding up his phone. "I've got the whole thing recorded. He called her little girl 3 times, told her she probably stole the ticket, said she didn't belong in first class. And nobody helped her until she called you." Marcus Thompson's voice softened with something that might have been pain, or pride. Aaliyah, sweetheart, are you okay? Yes, Daddy. I'm okay. You handled this with more grace than most adults would. I'm proud of you. Then his voice hardened again. Mr. Cartwright, my legal team will be in touch. Discrimination, harassment of a minor, and creating a hostile environment are serious matters. I hope your employer has good liability insurance. Edward Cartwright shot to his feet, panic finally breaking through his arrogance. Wait, please, I didn't mean, I'm so sorry, I made a terrible mistake. You made several, Marcus corrected coldly. You assumed. You dismissed. You mocked. And you refused to examine your own behavior even when presented with evidence. Those aren't mistakes, Mr. Cartwright. Those are choices. Please, Mr. Thompson, I have a family, I have a career. And my daughter has dignity. Which you attempted to strip from her in front of a cabin full of witnesses. The silver-haired man in 1A turned around fully, his expression disgusted. You should be ashamed, he said to Cartwright. That child showed more class in 5 minutes than you've shown in your entire life. The woman in pearls, who'd been silent throughout, finally spoke up, her voice thick with emotion. I'm sorry I didn't speak up sooner. I should have defended you immediately. She was looking directly at Aaliyah now. You deserved better from all of us. Other passengers began voicing agreement, the tide turning completely. She showed her ticket right away. He was completely out of line. The way he talked to her was disgusting. Edward Cartwright sank back down, his head in his hands, as the social consequences of his actions crashed over him like a wave. Marcus Thompson continued, methodical and precise. Captain, I want airport security, airline management, and if possible, your chief operating officer to meet this plane at the gate. I want statements taken from witnesses. I want video evidence preserved. And I want documentation of every communication failure that allowed this situation to escalate. Understood, Mr. Thompson. We're taxiing back now. The aircraft lurched gently as it began its turn, the whine of the engines shifting pitch. Through the windows, passengers could see they were indeed heading back toward the terminal. This is really happening, someone whispered. He's actually grounding the entire flight, another voice added, awe and disbelief mixing together. Jennifer Morrison, the flight attendant, had collapsed into a jump seat, her face buried in her hands, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Her colleague, an older woman who'd been watching from the galley, approached Aaliyah with a bottle of water and a look of profound regret. Miss Thompson, I'm so deeply sorry this happened to you. Is there anything I can get you? Aaliyah shook her head politely. No, thank you. I just want to sit in my seat. The older flight attendant's eyes glistened. Of course, sweetheart. Of course you do. She turned to Edward Cartwright, her voice carrying steel. Sir, you need to move. Now. Cartwright stumbled to his feet, gathering his belongings with shaking hands, no longer meeting anyone's eyes. He retreated to an empty seat in row 5, the walk of shame witnessed by every passenger in first class. Aaliyah finally settled into seat 2A, her seat, her rightful place, and placed her bag in the compartment above with the same calm efficiency she'd carried throughout the entire ordeal. Marcus Thompson's voice came through one final time, softer now. Aaliyah, I'll meet you at the gate. We'll sort everything out together. Okay, Daddy. I love you. I love you too, sweetheart. You did everything right. Remember that. The call ended. The cabin remained eerily silent as the plane completed its return to the gate. The only sounds the mechanical were of the aircraft and the quiet sniffles of Jennifer Morrison contemplating her now uncertain future. The teenager with the recording turned to Aaliyah and gave her a small nod of respect. She nodded back. And as Flight 457 came to a stop at the gate, emergency lights flashing outside the windows, security vehicles already visible through the glass, every single person in that first-class cabin understood one undeniable truth. They had just witnessed the moment when power stopped being about entitlement and became about accountability. When privilege met justice. And when a little girl taught an entire airplane that respect isn't negotiable, regardless of age, race, or assumptions. The door opened. And the consequences began. The jet bridge connected with a metallic thunk that echoed through the silent cabin like a gavel striking wood. Within seconds, the aircraft door swung open, and a stream of officials entered with the purposeful efficiency of people who knew this situation was already spiraling into a corporate nightmare. Two airport security officers in high-visibility vests came first, their expressions professionally neutral but their eyes sharp, assessing. Behind them, 3 airline executives in crisp uniforms, a operations manager with graying temples, a customer service director clutching a tablet, and a stern-looking woman whose badge identified her as Senior VP of Operations. Bringing up the rear were 2 Metropolitan Police officers, their presence transforming this from a customer service issue into a legal matter. The lead security officer, a tall black man with kind eyes, approached Aaliyah first. "Miss Thompson. I'm Officer Davies. Are you all right?" Aaliyah nodded, her composure finally showing the smallest crack, relief that someone was asking if she was okay, not whether she belonged. "Yes, sir. Thank you. We're going to take some statements and sort this out properly. Can you tell me what happened?" Before Aaliyah could speak, the senior VP stepped forward, her face a professional mask of concern that didn't quite hide the panic underneath. She extended her hand. "Miss Thompson, I'm Caroline Webb, Senior Vice President of Operations. On behalf of the airline, I want to express our deepest apologies for what you've experienced. This is absolutely unacceptable, and we will conduct a thorough investigation." The teenager with the Howard hoodie spoke up from his seat. "You don't need to investigate much. I've got the whole thing on video." Every head in the cabin turned toward him. "I started recording when he first told her to go back to economy," the teenager continued, holding up his phone. "Got everything. The dismissal, the lies, the flight attendant siding with him without checking either ticket. All of it." Caroline Webb's professional mask slipped for just a moment, her face going pale. May we see that footage?" "Absolutely." The teenager stood, approaching the officials with his phone extended. "I'm Marcus Williams. I'm a sophomore at Howard studying journalism. And this?" He gestured at his screen. "This is exactly why I always keep recording when I see injustice happening." Officer Davies took the phone, angling it so his colleague and the airline executives could see. As the video played, Aaliyah's polite requests, Edward Cartwright's dismissive sneers, Jennifer Morrison's biased assumptions, the officials' expressions darkened progressively. "Little girl, you're confused. Economy is that way. I don't care what you have." The customer service director actually flinched when Cartwright's voice came through saying, "She probably found a ticket on the ground or printed a fake online." When the video ended, silence hung heavy in the cabin. Edward Cartwright, still slumped in row 5, tried to salvage something from the wreckage. "That video doesn't show the full context," he began, his voice shaky but attempting authority. "She was being aggressive, confrontational. I felt threatened by an 11-year-old girl." Officer Davies interrupted, his tone flat. "You felt threatened by a child half your size, who spoke politely, presented documentation, and stood her ground when you refused to verify your own seat assignment?" "I was just trying to." "Mr. Cartwright," the police officer cut in, stepping forward with a notebook, "I'm going to need your full name, identification, and a formal statement. Be aware that anything you say can be used in potential legal proceedings." Cartwright's face crumbled completely. "Legal proceedings? For a seat mix-up? For harassment of a minor, discrimination, and creating a hostile environment," the officer corrected. "Those are serious allegations." Jennifer Morrison tried next, her voice desperate and thick with tears. "I was just trying to de-escalate the situation. I thought if I could just get her to step off the plane for a moment, we could sort everything out calmly without disrupting the other passengers. You assumed she was the problem, the woman in the burgundy blazer said sharply from row 3. Not the grown man who refused to show his ticket. Not the adult throwing a tantrum. The child with documentation. She was the one you wanted to remove. Caroline Webb turned to Morrison, and the look on her face could have frozen water. Jennifer, you'll be suspended pending a full investigation. Please collect your belongings and report to HR immediately upon arrival at headquarters. Morrison's sob was audible throughout the cabin. Then, Caroline Webb's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, and her already pale face went ghost white. He's here, she whispered to her colleagues. Marcus Thompson is here. At the gate. A ripple of shock moved through the officials. He flew from where? The operations manager hissed. He didn't fly. His office is in London. He's been here the whole time. 30 seconds later, the cabin door opened again. And Marcus Thompson stepped aboard. He was exactly as he appeared in photos, tall, commanding presence, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. But it was his eyes that captured attention, intelligent, assessing, and currently burning with controlled fury. Daddy. Aaliyah stood, and for the first time since the ordeal began, she looked like what she was, a child seeking comfort from her father. Marcus moved to her immediately, gathering her into an embrace that was both protective and tender. I'm here, sweetheart. I'm right here. He held her for a long moment, then straightened, his hand remaining on her shoulder as he surveyed the cabin, the officials, the cowering Cartwright, the sobbing Morrison, the watching passengers. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of someone used to reshaping industries with words alone. I want to be very clear about something, he began, his gaze moving deliberately from face to face. This isn't about wealth. This isn't about my company's investment position in this airline. This isn't even about my daughter specifically, though make no mistake, every protective instinct I have is currently active. He paused, letting that sink in. This is about a fundamental failure of human decency. My daughter presented valid documentation and was dismissed because of her age and her race. A grown man occupied her seat and refused to verify his own assignment because he assumed, based on appearance alone, that he belonged and she didn't. Edward Cartwright had shrunk so far into his seat he seemed to be trying to disappear through the leather. Marcus continued, his voice steady but passionate. And a trained professional, someone tasked with passenger safety and service, chose to side with unfounded assumptions over documented evidence. That's not a mistake. That's bias. That's the same prejudice that has caused countless black children, black adults, black families to be removed from planes, questioned in stores, suspected in their own neighborhoods. Several passengers were nodding now, some wiping tears. My daughter is 11 years old. She has addressed the United Nations. She runs educational initiatives on 3 continents. She carries herself with more dignity and grace than many adults I know. And today, she was treated like she stole her seat because someone couldn't imagine that a black child might belong in first class. He looked directly at Caroline Webb. Your policies need to change. Your training needs to change. And your culture needs to change. Because this should never happen to anyone, regardless of who their father is. Then Marcus turned to the cabin at large, his expression softening slightly. Respect is not given based on age, race, or appearance, he said quietly, but his words carried to every corner of the aircraft. It is granted because it is a human right. Every person, every child, deserves to be believed when they present truth. Deserves to be heard when they speak up. Deserves to occupy space they have rightfully earned without having to prove their worth to strangers who've already decided they don't belong. The silence that followed was profound. Caroline Webb nodded slowly, her eyes glistening. Mr. Thompson, you have my word, we will do better. We must do better. Marcus looked down at his daughter, pride and pain mixing in his expression. Aaliyah handled this with more grace than this situation deserved. She is the lesson here. Not me. And as airport security escorted Edward Cartwright off the plane, as Jennifer Morrison followed in disgrace, as witnesses gave statements and video evidence was documented, the passengers of Flight 457 learned something that should have been obvious from the start. Truth doesn't care about assumptions. Justice doesn't bend to convenience. And a child's dignity is just as sacred as anyone else's. The walk of shame began with a police officer's firm but professional voice. "Mr. Cartwright, you'll need to come with us." Edward Cartwright stood on unsteady legs, his expensive suit now wrinkled and sweat-stained, his earlier arrogance completely evaporated. He reached for his laptop bag with trembling hands, avoiding every single pair of eyes watching him. This is completely unnecessary," he tried one last time, his voice barely above a whisper. "I said I was sorry. Can't we just—" "Sir, you need to exit the aircraft now," the second officer said, positioning himself to block any retreat. As Cartwright shuffled down the aisle, passengers didn't look away. They watched. Bore witness. Let him feel the weight of what he'd done. The teenager with the Howard hoodie met his eyes as he passed. "Hope it was worth it, man." The woman in pearl simply shook her head, disgust written plainly on her face. The silver-haired man in 1A said nothing, but his expression spoke volumes. When Cartwright reached the aircraft door, he paused, turning back one final time as if he might appeal to Marcus Thompson for mercy. Marcus simply looked at him. Didn't speak. Didn't need to. And Edward Cartwright disappeared into the jet bridge, escorted by security, his reputation and quite possibly his career walking off the plane with him. Jennifer Morrison's exit was quieter but no less devastating. Caroline Webb approached her with the clinical precision of someone delivering news they'd delivered before but never enjoyed. "Jennifer, your suspension is effective immediately. You'll surrender your credentials and report to HR at headquarters by end of business today. A formal investigation will follow, but given the video evidence and witness statements," she paused, her meaning clear. "I'd suggest you contact your union representative." Morrison's face crumpled. "Caroline, please, I've been with this airline for 12 years. I have a mortgage, I have." "You had a responsibility," Caroline interrupted, not unkindly but firmly. "To treat every passenger with equal dignity. To verify facts before making judgments. To protect vulnerable travelers, especially children, not target them for removal based on assumptions." She softened slightly. "I'm sorry, Jennifer. But this is beyond my authority to fix." As Morrison gathered her things, she paused near Aaliyah's seat. For a moment, it seemed she might apologize. But Aaliyah's steady gaze, not angry, not vindictive, just tired, seemed to steal whatever words she'd planned to say. Morrison left in silence, her career in tatters, a cautionary tale about the cost of unchecked bias. Once the aircraft had cleared of everyone except passengers, crew, and the airline executives, Caroline Webb turned to face Aaliyah directly. She crouched down, not condescendingly, but to meet Aaliyah at eye level, and spoke with genuine emotion in her voice. "Miss Thompson, on behalf of this airline, our entire leadership team, and every employee who failed you today, I am profoundly sorry. What happened to you was discrimination, pure and simple. And we take full responsibility." Aaliyah nodded quietly, accepting but not absolving. Caroline continued, "Your father is right. Our policies need to change. Our training needs to change. And we need to do the hard work of examining how bias operates in our systems." She glanced at Marcus. "With your permission, Mr. Thompson, we'd like to invite you and Aaliyah to participate in developing new anti-discrimination protocols, not as a PR gesture, but as genuine partners in reform." Marcus considered this, then looked at his daughter. "What do you think, sweetheart?" Aaliyah thought for a moment, then spoke with the wisdom of someone far older than 11. "I think people shouldn't need to be embarrassed into doing the right thing. But if this helps even one other kid not go through what I went through today," she nodded. "Then yes. I'll help. Caroline's eyes glistened. Thank you. Truly. She stood, addressing the cabin at large, will be issuing a public statement within the hour acknowledging what occurred and outlining immediate steps toward reform. And will be personally reaching out to every passenger on this manifest to apologize for the delay and the distress you witnessed. The operations manager cleared his throat. Miss Thompson, we'd also like to offer you complimentary flights for a year, upgraded accommodations, and... She doesn't need your compensation, Marcus said quietly. She needs your commitment to change. That's all. The manager nodded, chastened. Understood, sir. As the executives finally exited and the remaining crew began preparing for an actual departure, Aaliyah settled back into seat 2A, her seat, finally, rightfully, undeniably hers. She smoothed her coat, adjusted her seatbelt, and let out a long, quiet breath. The silver-haired man in 1A turned around, his weathered face kind. Young lady, I've been flying for 40 years. I've seen a lot of things. But I have never, seen someone handle injustice with the grace and strength you showed today. He extended his hand. Dr. Richard Chen. And it was an honor to witness you. Aaliyah shook his hand, a small smile finally breaking through. Thank you, Dr. Chen. The woman in pearls leaned across the aisle, tears streaming down her face. You taught us all something today, she said, her voice thick with emotion. About courage. About dignity. About standing up even when the world tries to make you sit down. She pressed her hand to her heart. I won't forget this. I promise you, I won't forget. Around the cabin, passengers began to applaud. It started with the teenager, Marcus Williams, clapping slowly, deliberately. Then Dr. Chen joined. Then the woman in pearls. Then the woman in burgundy from row 3. Within seconds, the entire first-class cabin was applauding, not for a show, not for performance, but in genuine respect for a child who had taught them all what dignity looked like under pressure. Aaliyah ducked her head, embarrassed but also, finally, allowed to just be a kid who'd done something hard and survived it. Marcus squeezed her shoulder, his eyes bright with emotion. I'm so proud of you, sweetheart. I just did what you taught me, Daddy. No, he said softly. You did it better than I ever could have. By the time Flight 457 finally departed, 2 hours late but with a cabin full of passengers who just witnessed history, the story was already exploding across the internet. Marcus Williams had uploaded his video with a simple caption, "This is what everyday racism looks like. This is what standing up to it looks like. This is Aaliyah Thompson. Remember her name. #respect her seat." Within an hour, it had 500,000 views. Within 3 hours, it was trending globally. News outlets picked it up. Social media exploded with reactions. Celebrities shared it. Activists analyzed it. Parents showed it to their children as a lesson in both prejudice and perseverance. #respect her seat became more than a hashtag. It became a movement. People shared their own stories of being dismissed, discriminated against, told they didn't belong. Black travelers recounted being removed from flights, questioned about their tickets, assumed to be in the wrong seats. The airline stock dipped briefly, then stabilized as they released a comprehensive statement acknowledging failure and committing to systemic change. Edward Cartwright's employer issued a statement saying he'd been placed on administrative leave pending internal review, corporate speak for, he's done. And Jennifer Morrison became a case study in bias training seminars, her mistake immortalized as a teaching moment. But at the center of it all was Aaliyah, poised in seat 2A, headphones on, reading a book, looking for all the world like exactly what she was. A child who'd simply wanted to sit in the seat she'd paid for. A child who'd refused to be moved. A child who'd changed the conversation, and as the plane climbed into the clouds, carrying passengers who'd just learned an unforgettable lesson about respect, dignity, and the dangerous cost of assumptions. Aaliyah Thompson smiled quietly to herself. Because she'd done more than defend her seat. She defended her right to exist in spaces without apology. And the world had finally listened. By the time Flight 457 touched down in Miami, Aaliyah Thompson's name was already echoing across every continent. The video had been viewed 20 million times. Major news networks had picked up the story within hours of the initial post. CNN ran it as their lead segment during the evening broadcast, with the anchor's voice grave as the footage played. An 11-year-old girl's fight for dignity at 30,000 feet has sparked a global conversation about bias, discrimination, and who gets to belong in spaces of privilege. BBC World News featured an interview with aviation industry analysts discussing systemic discrimination in air travel. What happened to Aaliyah Thompson is not an isolated incident, one expert explained. Studies show that black passengers are disproportionately questioned, removed, and discriminated against on flights worldwide. What makes this case remarkable is that she had the resources and platform to fight back. Most don't. Sky News aired a split screen showing the video alongside statements from civil rights organizations praising Aaliyah's composure and condemning the airline's initial response. Social media erupted like a dam breaking. Twitter, now X, saw #RespectHerSeat trend #1 globally for 3 consecutive days. Instagram was flooded with reaction videos, think pieces, and artistic tributes. TikTok exploded with teenagers recreating the moment, practicing how they'd respond to similar situations, teaching each other about microaggressions and standing firm. Celebrities weighed in. Activists amplified the message. Politicians referenced it in speeches about equity and access. But it wasn't just about outrage. It was about recognition. Thousands, then hundreds of thousands, of people began sharing their own stories. I was told I couldn't be in business class because I looked too young to afford it. I was 34 and a senior engineer. #RespectHerSeat. Security followed me through a luxury store while my white friend shopped freely. I had more money in my account than anyone in that building. #RespectHerSeat. A teacher assumed I was the troublemaker in class because I'm a black boy who dresses in streetwear. Took 3 months to change her mind. #RespectHerSeat. The stories poured in, a global testimony of dignity denied and constantly fought for. And at the center of it all was an 11-year-old girl who'd simply refused to move. Within a week, Marcus Thompson's office was inundated with interview requests, speaking invitations, and partnership proposals. Harvard Business School wanted him to keynote their annual diversity conference. The World Economic Forum invited him to join a panel on systemic bias in corporate structures. Fortune 500 companies, suddenly very aware of their own bias blind spots, reached out requesting consultation on equity training. Marcus accepted selectively, using each platform not to elevate himself but to elevate the issue. At the Harvard event, he stood before a packed auditorium and spoke with the measured authority that had built his empire. "My daughter didn't go viral because she's my daughter," he said. "She went viral because her experience is universal. Because every black parent in this room has had the conversation with their children about how the world will see them. How they'll have to be twice as good to be seen as half as worthy. How they'll need documentation, proof, witnesses, just to claim space they've rightfully earned." He paused, letting the silence settle. "But here's what my daughter taught me that day: grace and power are not opposites." She didn't yell. Didn't cry. Didn't make herself smaller to make others comfortable. She simply stood in her truth, and forced everyone around her to confront their assumptions. The auditorium erupted in applause. And the video of that speech went viral too. But it was Aaliyah herself who truly captured the world's imagination. Invitations flooded in from schools, youth conferences, leadership summits, and educational organizations globally. At first, Marcus was protective, wanting to shield her from the intensity of sudden fame. But Aaliyah had other ideas. "Daddy," she said one evening as they reviewed requests together in their Miami home, "if I don't use this moment, then what was it all for? People are listening right now. I need to say something worth hearing." Marcus looked at his daughter, so young, yet somehow already understanding the weight and opportunity of platform, and nodded. Then let's make sure you say it right. 3 weeks after the incident, Aaliyah stood on a stage at the National Youth Leadership Summit in Washington, D.C., before an audience of 2,000 young people and countless more watching via livestream. She wore a simple but elegant navy dress, her natural hair styled in beautiful twists, her posture confident but not performative. When she spoke, her voice was clear and strong. "My name is Aaliyah Thompson. And 3 weeks ago, a man told me I didn't belong in a seat I'd paid for, because of how I looked. Because of assumptions he made in 3 seconds about who I was and what I deserved." The audience was silent, riveted. But here's what I learned: that moment wasn't about a seat. It was about dignity. About the fundamental human right to exist in spaces without having to constantly prove your worth. And that's why I'm launching something today. She clicked to the next slide, and the screen behind her illuminated with a simple but powerful logo, Seat 2A Initiative, because everyone belongs. The Seat 2A Initiative is a campaign focused on dignity in public spaces and anti-discrimination education. We're partnering with schools, airlines, businesses, and community organizations to teach people, especially young people, about unconscious bias, how to recognize it, and how to stand against it. The applause began, but Aaliyah held up her hand gently. "We're creating resources for kids who face discrimination, scripts for how to respond, documentation guides, legal rights education. We're training staff in public-facing industries on equitable treatment. And we're collecting stories, thousands of them, from people who've been told they don't belong, so the world can see just how widespread this problem is." She paused, her eyes scanning the audience. "Because the truth is, what happened to me happens every single day to people who don't have cameras recording. Who don't have powerful parents. Who don't have platforms. And those are the people we're fighting for." The standing ovation lasted 5 full minutes. Within 2 months, the Seat 2A initiative had chapters in 15 countries. Schools integrated the curriculum into their diversity education programs. Airlines, not just the one involved in the incident, but competitors desperate to avoid similar scandals, implemented new bias training protocols. Major corporations sponsored workshops. And the stories kept coming, a living, growing archive of discrimination faced and dignity defended. A black doctor removed from a flight despite having credentials was invited to share his story at a Seat 2A summit. A Latina teenager profiled in a department store became a youth ambassador for the initiative. A Muslim family harassed at an airport found community and support through Seat 2A's network. The initiative became more than a campaign. It became a movement, a global affirmation that everyone, regardless of age, race, appearance, or assumption, deserves to be treated with fundamental human respect. 6 months after the incident, Aaliyah sat for an interview with Time magazine for their Next Generation Leaders issue. The interviewer asked, "Do you ever regret what happened? Wish it had never occurred?" Aaliyah considered the question thoughtfully. "I wish I lived in a world where it didn't have to happen," she said slowly. "Where a child could board a plane without being questioned. Where documentation was enough. Where skin color didn't trigger suspicion." She paused. "But since it did happen, I'm glad I didn't back down, because now millions of people are having conversations they weren't having before. Kids are learning they have rights. Adults are examining their biases. And maybe, just maybe, the next black girl who boards a plane won't have to fight as hard as I did to simply sit down." The interview became Time's most read digital article that year. And Aaliyah Thompson, 11 years old, brilliant, brave, and unbowed, became the face of a generation refusing to accept discrimination as inevitable. All because she refused to give up a seat that was rightfully hers. All because she understood that sometimes, the smallest acts of resistance create the largest waves of change. And the world was finally ready to listen. 6 months later, Aaliyah Thompson boarded another flight. Same airline. Same route. London to Miami. And once again, she was assigned to Seat 2A. The difference was immediate and unmistakable. The gate agent recognized her instantly, her face lighting up with genuine warmth. "Miss Thompson, it's an honor to have you flying with us today. We've upgraded your experience and our entire team has been briefed on providing you with exceptional service." Aaliyah smiled politely. "Thank you, but I don't need anything special. I just need to be treated like everyone else." The agent nodded, understanding the deeper meaning. "Of course. Have a wonderful flight." As Aaliyah walked down the jet bridge, she noticed the changes. New signage about passenger rights and dignity. Posters featuring diverse faces with the tagline, "Everyone belongs. No exceptions." A small placard near the aircraft entrance with the Seat 2A initiative logo. The flight attendants, a diverse crew that included the older woman who'd apologized to her that fateful day, greeted her with respect that felt earned, not performative. "Welcome aboard, Miss Thompson. Your seat is ready whenever you are." Aaliyah made her way to row 2, and this time, Seat 2A was empty. Waiting. Welcoming. She settled into the cream leather, placed her bag in the overhead compartment, and pulled out her journal, a leather-bound book her father had given her with a simple inscription on the first page, "Your story matters. Write it down." She'd been journaling since that day. Documenting not just what happened, but how it felt, what she learned, who she was becoming because of it. Now, as the cabin filled with passengers, some recognizing her and offering respectful nods, others oblivious, focused on their own journeys, Aaliyah opened to a fresh page and began to write. "Today I'm flying in Seat 2A again. The same seat. The same route. But everything feels different. It's not just the airline's policy changes or the training programs or even the recognition. It's me. I'm different. 6 months ago, I stood in this aisle and fought for my right to sit down. I didn't know then that I was fighting for more than just myself. I didn't know that one moment would become a movement. That one seat would symbolize every space where people are told they don't belong. Daddy told me something last night as we were packing. He said, justice isn't loud. It is precise. It doesn't announce itself with trumpets. It arrives quietly, in the moment when someone decides they will not be moved. I think I understand that now." She paused, pen hovering over the page, as a young black girl, maybe 8 years old, walked past with her mother, heading toward economy. The girl's eyes were wide, taking in the luxury of first class with wonder. When she saw Aaliyah, her face lit up with recognition. "Mama, that's her. That's the Seat 2A girl." The mother smiled apologetically at Aaliyah, gently steering her daughter forward. But Aaliyah called out softly. "Wait." They stopped. Turned back. Aaliyah stood, approached them, and crouched down to the little girl's level. "What's your name?" "Zara," the girl said shyly. "Zara, that's beautiful. Listen, wherever you're sitting on this plane, that's your seat. Your space. And don't let anyone ever tell you that you don't belong somewhere you have every right to be. Okay?" Zara nodded solemnly, as if receiving sacred instruction. Her mother's eyes glistened. "Thank you," she whispered. "You have no idea what you've done for girls like her. Like me." As they continued toward their seats, Aaliyah returned to 2A and her journal, that interaction settling something in her chest, a confirmation that the fight had been worth it. "I used to think belonging was about having money, or connections, or the right last name. But I've learned it's simpler and more complicated than that. Belonging is about dignity. About recognizing that every person, regardless of age, race, background, or appearance, deserves to occupy space without apology. Without having to prove themselves, without having to fight just to sit down. Some seats in life are not just assigned. They are earned, not by wealth, but by dignity. By standing firm when the world tries to move you. By speaking truth when silence would be easier. By believing in your own worth even when others refuse to see it." The plane began to taxi, the familiar rumble of engines powering up, the ground slowly moving beneath them. Aaliyah looked out the window, past the terminal, past the runway, toward the sky that was about to hold them. She thought about Edward Cartwright, whose name was now synonymous with unchecked privilege and the consequences of discrimination. About Jennifer Morrison, who'd lost her career but sparked crucial conversations about bias in customer service. About the thousands of people who'd shared their stories, finding community in collective experience. But mostly, she thought about the little girl named Zara, walking toward economy with stars in her eyes and new understanding that she belonged anywhere she chose to be. I'm not just the girl from Seat 2A anymore. I'm becoming someone who uses her voice to make sure others don't have to fight as hard as I did. Someone who turns pain into purpose. Someone who understands that the moments that test us often become the moments that define us. Daddy says I'm wise beyond my years. But I don't feel wise. I just feel awake. Aware. Responsible for doing something with the platform I never asked for but now have. The Seat 2A initiative is growing. We're in 23 countries now. We've trained over 10,000 people in anti-bias protocols. We've helped hundreds of kids who face discrimination find their voices and their power. But the work isn't done. It's never done. Because prejudice is old and stubborn, and it hides in assumptions that seem harmless until they're weaponized against someone's dignity. So I'll keep flying. Keep speaking. Keep writing. Keep showing the world that a child can stand up to injustice and win, not through anger or revenge, but through unwavering belief in their own worth. The plane lifted off the ground, London falling away beneath them, clouds gathering to welcome them into the sky. Aaliyah closed her journal and rested her head against the window, watching the world transform into patchwork fields and miniature cities, everything becoming small and manageable from this height. She smiled softly, her father's words echoing once more, "You belong everywhere you choose to be, sweetheart. Don't ever forget that." She wouldn't. This is not just a story about a seat. It is a story about belonging. About the courage it takes to stand firm when the world tries to diminish you. About the grace required to fight injustice without losing your humanity. About the truth that dignity is not a privilege, it is a birthright. Aaliyah Thompson claimed her seat that day. But in doing so, she created space for countless others to claim theirs too. And that legacy, that ripple of change spreading outward from one moment of resistance, continues to grow. Because some battles are fought with armies and legislation and institutional reform. And some are fought by an 11-year-old girl who simply refuses to move. Both matter. Both change the world. As the flight leveled out at cruising altitude, the captain's voice came through the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've reached our cruising altitude of 38,000 feet. We hope you have a comfortable flight, and we're honored to have every single one of you aboard today." Aaliyah caught the subtle emphasis on every single one and smiled. Change was happening. Slowly, imperfectly, but unmistakably. And she'd helped make it so. Not because she was a billionaire's daughter. Not because she had resources others lacked. But because she understood a fundamental truth. Everyone belongs. No exceptions. And sometimes, all it takes is one person, one voice, one stand, one refusal to be moved, to remind the world of that simple, sacred truth. This was Aaliyah Thompson's story, but there are countless others, stories of courage, resistance, and dignity in the face of injustice. Stories that need to be told. Voices that deserve to be heard. Subscribe to this channel, stay with us. Because the fight for belonging is far from over. And the next story? It might just change everything you thought you knew about power, privilege, and the price of standing firm. This is NUV Stories, where every narrative matters, and every voice has the power to transform the world. Welcome home. You belong here.